Yeah, good afternoon and welcome to A View from Afar. And today we're joined by Paul Buchanan, as always, and we're going to be looking at this big issue relating to the attempted assassination on Donald Trump. And in particular, Paul and I will, Paul is for us, is going to deliver a preliminary assessment of the assassination attempt on the former United States President Donald Trump from a security point of view, and also then we will engage in looking deeper into the politics of it and what we can expect in the future. But just remember at this juncture, it's important to be clear. To achieve a robust analysis of this crime, it will require a thorough assessment of eyewitness accounts, details of the supposed gunman, his background, his associations, political or potential motivations, and a lot of that work is going on at the moment. But importantly, a deep assessment also of the role of the security agencies. Now, to determine a clear and probable account of that, of what happened in Pennsylvania this weekend, we would need all of that information and apply it obviously before and against variances or avoidances by all of those different elements or peoples that are involved in the investigation and the crime of what occurred. But clearly much of that information is not yet available to us. However, there is enough information for us to consider, or for Paul to consider, a preliminary assessment of just making sense of what really went on from a security point of view. So as we said just earlier there, we will then start to look at a deeper position on the politics, the implications, what we can expect to have occur in the immediate and the medium term periods as we go forward in what is obviously a huge and important campaign for the United States presidency. Now, with all of that being said, we will cross to Paul, who is waiting to speak to us live. But before we do so, just remember that if you are joining us live and wish to comment or lodge questions, we would very much welcome that, and we will continue to monitor those questions and comments that come in, and some of your comments may be included into this program. So with all of that said and done, let's cross to Paul, who is waiting there, as I said, online, and we will get this show underway. Thank you very much. Yeah, tēnā koe, Paul. Kia ora e hoa. How are you going over there?
Pretty good. Kia ora, Selwyn, and to all the listeners out there. Again, just as a reminder, people can find us on YouTube, preferably, both live and then later on Facebook to a lesser extent, but most social media has View from Afar and your favorite streaming platforms, just in case people don't know where to go exactly. But someone tells me YouTube is the best place to find this show. So anyway, yeah, I have a weird feeling, but not in the way that people have been commentating since the event occurred yesterday. I've been struck by the fact that U.S. politicians are saying this is un American. This is not the way it should be. And I would beg to differ. This is as American as apple pie. The United States has the foremost history of assassinations and assassination attempts of presidents and presidential candidates of the entire liberal democratic world. So this is Americana in front of you, a guy with a gun deciding to do in a presidential candidate. For whatever reason, we still don't know. And so let's just start with that. Let's stop with the mealy mouth calls to unity and that sort of thing. That is not going to happen. Already, the Republicans are trying to make political hay out of this by saying that Biden and others, when they say that Trump is a threat to democracy, when they say that he's an authoritarian, they're calling for him to be killed. This is now being said by Republican politicians. They're saying the CIA orchestrated this. The deep state is involved. It's not going to improve anything. There's no coming together over this. And we'll talk about the political implications in a few minutes. But let's start with the security stuff. It's been done to death already, but I'll just do a quick primer because there is some angles I think that we need to think about. Basically, and remember, this is not the president. This is a former presidential candidate. So they don't get the level of Secret Service protection that the president does. In fact, a lot of their convoys and whatnot have to be paid for by the campaign, not by the U.S. government, unlike the president. So although there's armored vehicles, there's 4 or 5 of them that may be taxpayer funded. The rest of the entourage are on the campaign's dime, just to give you an idea of the differences. Now, this setting was basically a fairgrounds in Western Pennsylvania. So the stage
I'll just bring it up on screen for people who are watching us live, and then you can refer to it. You can see it as well, I think, Paul.
Yeah, very good. So as you can see, those the structures behind the stage, my understanding is they are barns. Again, when there's 4-H shows and those sort of things. But the interesting part is that there was a low chain link fence, waist-high chain link fence, that was about 50 feet from the stage and went in a semicircle around the area where the crowds gathered. So that was a natural perimeter, if you will, of the inner circle where they put up bleachers, both in front and behind and on the sides of the stage. Now, the close personal protection detail, the people in suits, they're with the president and they're in and around the stage, including 2 were standing on the stage off to the side. That's pro forma, always done. Interestingly, there was a tactical team, so people dressed in military gear with military weapons, helmets, the full Monty. They were behind the stage. They were not deployed onto the perimeter or anywhere else. They were staging behind the stage, if you will, and then they came running out after shots were fired. Questions are going to be asked about that. Why they were not deployed in and around the perimeter so as to have a second layer of protection, because that's the key here. The protective detail around VIPs has concentric circles of protection. The inner one is the people on the stage and right in front of the stage. The next closest is that perimeter fence. And apparently there was some law enforcement on the inside of the fence. But now it gets interesting. Apparently on the outside of the fence, on that field leading to where the shooter climbed up on the roof, that was local law enforcement. And local law enforcement was the state police, the county sheriff or the county police, and then the city of Butler's police. And they were there basically doing, mild crowd control. Now, here's where things get interesting. There will be questions asked as to what were the communications between local law enforcement and the Secret Service. Why? Because the Secret Service agents were stationed on a roof. There was a sniper team stationed on a roof about 100 yards or so from the shooter's position on this other building. The shooter was about 175 yards or meters from the stage, and he had a clear line of sight on the stage. That should not happen. Remember, usually all of this is cased in advance. High points, vantage points are figured out and then are blocked. That obviously did not happen here, so that is a failure. But here's where it might get interesting. The Secret Service sniper team were seen looking in the direction of the shooter well before the shots began to fire. At the same time, there were people standing in the tree line between the shooter's position and the field, and people in the field itself who were saying to local law enforcement, saying to cops, there's a guy with a gun up on the roof. Repeatedly, there were cops right below the shooter's position, and people were saying, we just saw a guy climb up with a gun. And they discounted, they did nothing, and they just, did crowd control. Now, I think this could be the explanation. The shooter was dressed in khaki pants and a greenish gray t-shirt. And as we have now found out, he was carrying an AR-15, a military-style weapon, a weapon that is used by law enforcement, all right? I have a feeling that the law enforcement people on the ground, as well as the Secret Service snipers, thought, as they saw the guy climb up, that they were looking at a local law enforcement sniper who was a little late to the game. That, he had somehow been delayed in taking his position to secure that part of the perimeter. And so they hesitated because they couldn't be sure that he wasn't just, he was dressed in sort of semi-military uniform carrying that sort of weapon. Obviously, as soon as he started firing, the Secret Service team killed him. But he was able to get off 4 or 5 rounds before they did. So the questions will be, what happened in that interface between the Secret Service and local enforcement? And I would be willing to bet that they dropped the ball because of miscommunications, that one agency thought the other agency was going to cover that rooftop. Messages were not passed along, and the situation developed as we did. It'll be also interesting. I would say that, for better or for worse, the young man who was the shooter was not a marksman, was not a trained rifleman. At a distance of 175 yards with a scope, an AR-15 should have killed the president. It carries a fairly heavy round. Remember, this is a weapons of war. Its sole purpose is to kill or maim an enemy so the enemy stops fighting. That he was able to miss the president, but yet kill someone in the stands and then very severely injure 2 other people.
Is it correct that the first shot that went off was what took a part of Donald Trump's ear?
I'm not sure, but it could well be possible. But what I'll say this, Selwyn, the kinetic force that is carried by that 5.56 grain bullet. Okay, again, you don't put any old bullet into an AR-15. You can put lighter weight bullets in it, but they normally come with the standard. They're actually NATO compatible ammunition. It carries a very heavy punch. And I am amazed that even if it grazed him, it didn't take his ear off. That's how lethal these rounds are. Heck, it didn't even ruffle his hair. His hair got ruffled when he dove to the ground.
Yeah.
This guy was just not a good shot. I initially, when I heard the pops, because I saw the event live, I thought, I know that the people confuse it with fireworks, but I've heard enough of these. So I'm
Yeah.
like, wow, that's a pretty low caliber weapon. I was thinking a 22, a
Right.
hunting rifle.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it did then, on retrospect, he was able to fire in semi automatic mode. Maybe there was some wind drift. Again, he was not a
Yeah.
marksman, so he
And
didn't
I
account
think for whatever reason, it looked like Trump just kind of moved his head slightly as well around the same time as he, clearly received that minor injury. So there's a little bit of obviously, variable and luck in that. But I pick up what you're saying from a user point of view in a combat situation. They would adjust for wind and they'd even adjust for fluctuations. They'd scope in on that, and then they've got their target fairly clean. Going back, you mentioned about the areas of perimeters of security. That makes a lot of sense, I think, to a lot of people, and the concentric circle kind of approach. We know, like you saw with Reagan, that was the right in close, wasn't it, when the attempt on his life occurred. That I suppose people would say is the vulnerable, immediate concentric circle of prevention that is occurring immediately around the stage. You've described that in the context of the different type of officers that were there with their various tasks, those within that tight area of perimeter. I know from my own experience up in Nigeria, attending CHOGM meetings where it's kind of similar, you've got dignitaries from around the world, and the perimeters of security, you could see it going in and out of different locations. Out at, say, perimeter number 5, it was an obvious, one of screening and things like that. The closer you got into the venue, I always found that perimeter number 3 perhaps was the most intense. Why I raise that, Paul, is if you think of it like concentric circles like you described it, one would imagine that the perimeters would have gone out beyond a building, which is pretty close really when you've described it in the case of how many yards away or metres. That would have been looked at. The security services would have scoped that out and thought, yep, there's potential problems there. There are buildings that are elevated. They can be, person can climb up on top of those. I would imagine that all of these kind of things will be looked at in any kind of investigation. It'll be interesting to see what is learnt from this, particularly when you kind of look back into the early 60s when John Fitzgerald Kennedy was assassinated. There was so many kind of considerations about where vulnerable and danger points exist when there is a dignitary on the move or is in a situation like a rally, like in this case. So getting back to just, perhaps an overview of this, what do you think? So you've raised the issue relating to communication. That makes a lot of sense because we've got different jurisdictions. There may be, for example, the headpiece that they're listening in and are not listening to the same ones, that they've got their own comms controller that they're listening to, and perhaps that's where there may be changes to protocol or whatever the word would be on best operating procedures around these types of things. Paul, am I on the right place on this? Is there anything to add to this before we move on to the very important part 2 about what we can expect from the politics, the changes in the campaign, some changes we've already noticed over the last 24 hours. But Paul, is there anything else just to tidy up on this before we move on?
Yeah, no, but we need to dwell a little bit because you raised some important points. Let's first begin with the last time someone took a long distance shot at a presidential candidate was JFK. All the other attempts since then have been relatively close range, the furthest from across the street, if you think about the Charles Manson followers who try to kill Jerry Ford, but they've been close in. So the emphasis has been on close personal protection. Put bodies between the shooter and the VIP. That is important because the further out you go into the perimeter circles, the more it's left to local law enforcement to secure those perimeters. The Secret Service goes out days in advance, locates and identifies vantage points that need to be secured, and then if it's outside the close protection area, they will tell local law enforcement, we need a guy on that rooftop, this sort of thing. So it was there that the ball got dropped. The designation of vantage points that needed to be secured before the rally. And maybe the officers in the field who were standing with the crowd outside of the chain link fence basically were a bit complacent, thinking that this is a Trump rally, everybody's MAGA, there will be no trouble, that there will be. Trump himself in that January 6th episode, he was told not to go to Capitol Hill because he might be in danger, and he turned to the Secret Service and said, no, they're my people. They're with me. They're not against me. So maybe that trickled down into the consciousness of local law enforcement, and they simply, either for that reason or, again, there was a miscommunication, as you've mentioned. Someone didn't say that rooftop needs to be secured. Interestingly, the photograph that you put of the rally site, the Secret Service snipers were on that white building behind the stage. So you can see the vantage point, 150 yards from the snipers to the shooter, and then about 175 from the shooter to the president. But look at the clean lines of sight. Yeah. All right? That shouldn't happen. Okay? That should not happen. So an investigation obviously will be launched. We may even see people scapegoated. But you can be assured that this will shake up the protocols, and the Secret Service now will have to start looking at the outer perimeters and how to make that more secure, because now we've had a repeat of a medium distance shot, something that hasn't happened since JFK's time. Now it's happened. They will adjust accordingly.
Okay, well, thanks for that. And I'll just make a comment for those that are watching and listening to this live, that some in YouTube have let me know that there is some sort of filter that's going on that YouTube is doing that is preventing them from being able to express their comments and questions in the normal fashion. I'm just wanting to reassure them that we haven't set any filters there. It may be that YouTube has coded in keywords, and when those keywords all connect, that the comments are not coming through. So just be aware of that when you're putting your questions in. And it might be, like I see, I'll bring up on screen as an example, David Mooring has put a question in at the moment, and he's been able to get it kind of there without triggering the filter that is excluding comments from coming through on that platform. And the question is, for those that are listening, from David Mooring, how many Roman emperors lost their life under the protection of the Praetorian Guard? And I think, Paul, you kind of rattled off, didn't you, the list of how many presidents presidents that had been assassinated or attempts made on them over the years in your immediate comments.
Yeah, but I don't like the way where David is going. This is not about the Praetorian Guard, okay? That he's insinuating that this was an inside job, that this was allowed to happen. And
we're not going there. Yeah,
we're not going there.
There's no information that would suggest that at this stage, and certainly it's we like to pride ourselves on a view from afar of dealing with a base of fact and going where the facts take us at any particular time. This is obviously very early in the investigations, and we're doing that. The other thing I'd just like to note too, that usually we have a sizable live audience coming in from X, or formerly Twitter. it seemed when we went live with this, Twitter cut us off. So there is a certain degree of sensitivities, I think, at the moment where they're trying to exclude a lot of things going through various platforms. So apologise for that on our behalf, but it's beyond our control. The good thing is that we've got the ability for some comments to come through, and to prove that, Barbara Thomas has just brought up a comment where she is saying, oh my God, that's a long time ago, and she's referring to David's one there. But yeah, if you can think and put your questions in a way that may not trip off particular filters that may have been applied, that would be great, and we'll bring them in. Paul, now let's look at the politics of all of this. What changes this makes in the election campaign for the United States presidency. What stands out to me is there's already been changes. What we've seen is after this, we've seen the Democrats basically pull a lot of their adverts that could have been seen as attack ads on Donald Trump, trying to expose the negative of him in his credentials as a potential leader, and certainly on the things that he said, things that he's campaigned on. Now, those adverts have been pulled, so we've already seen a change in the way the Democrats are approaching this. They clearly have sniffed the breeze and they've thought this guy is going to be in a position where we really can't go hard against this at this narrow time. Now, in the past, as I understand it, and it was discussed on the Rest is Politics podcast by Alistair Campbell and Rory Stewart over in the UK, and they raised this, and they were saying that when Ronald Reagan had that assassination attempt on his life, that his popularity went up very high in the immediate short term after that. And so there's a little bit of kind of analysis going on at the moment as to an expectation that Trump is somehow going to benefit in the polls from this attempt on his life. So having said that, over to you, because I know that you will see things in a much clearer picture than perhaps many of us that have experienced most of our lives outside of the United States.
Well, let's start out with, and not that I'm going to indulge this sort of fantasizing, but let's start with the bottom line. Who benefits from a near miss of a presidential candidate called Donald Trump? I mean, the guy has become a martyr without being martyred. And who benefits from this? Well, Trump, clearly Trump. That's where the conspiracy theories have started. On the left saying, oh, he staged this. And all I got to say is, boy, his crowd must be very ruthless if they're willing to kill off people in the stands in order to nick him in the ear, to turn him into a martyr. But there's a more important point. You just mentioned it. The Democrats have been intimidated by this. They have backed off with their ads. They'll say it's out of a sense of grace. No. They're intimidated. They're scared because they're afraid that if they continue attack ads on him, on his character and whatnot, that this will feed into the narrative that somehow they provoked it. Instead of, let's think of the language of American politics. Who brought violence into the mainstream? The scapegoating, calling migrants vermin, this and that. It was Trump. And yet now the Republicans have adroitly turned it around on the Democrats and said, see, you called him a fascist. You said bad words to that man. And some nutter freaked out, right? Because this person, the 20-year-old
shot. At best, many in his base are saying much more and reading into the conspiracy things as well, So, without, just really quickly, I'll just say, that it's been an observation that in the United States context of political campaigning, it's not about listening to the other person's argument. For many, 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 it is about, we got him. We really dented his ability to get his message out. And it's not so much a contesting of ideas and trying to win those swinging voters. It's about trying to get the other person out. Now, that obviously, that mood breeds conspiracy as well. I just wanted to add that in and just put it back to you there, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I stayed around to watch the aftermath of the rally. It was pretty impressive. There were a lot of people giving the finger and angrily shouting cuss words at the assembled media. I mean, raving mad. That didn't come from the Democrats. That hatred of the media, immediately blaming them, that didn't come from the Democrats, but the Democrats have responded, as they always do, with cowardice. They're like, oh, we're going to have to be nice now for a little while. But that brings up what I think are the fundamental points. The short-term effect is, yes, Trump is going to benefit. He's going to get a major boost. The photo of him with blood on his face being helped down the stairs with a bloody American flag flying behind him. If I didn't know there was a flag there, I would have thought it was Photoshopped. That photo is going to become iconic. Okay,
it's almost, without getting ahead of ourselves, that's like the Iwo Jima photograph. It is,
exactly.
Which was staged apparently, but it is like so many things that stand out in your memory that anchor you in on a particular time in history. That photograph has obviously got all the ingredients to it. Also, that there's still clear lines of potential shot on the potential target here, meaning Donald Trump. As he gets his fist up, he's still exposed. The Secret Service guys are still trying to actually struggle to make sure that their subject is in protection by their own bodies and things like that. But without going back to the security elements of it, that imagery, that he had the rat cunning to be able to, at a time only in a matter of minutes from having nearly lost his life, to think, right, up goes my hand in defiance, and to mouth out the words fight, fight, without knowing what people are going to be fighting for. But that's rat cunning. That is a guy that knows his opportunities as soon as he sees it, and it's an image that is obviously going to carry this iconic moment, or the decisive moment of this particular attempt on his life forward and through the campaign and beyond. Really, really powerful.
Yeah, and that's what's led to some of the rise of conspiracy theories, because he should have been bowled over and down the stairs. But he stood up, he asked for his shoes, and then he did the fist gesture and yelled, fight, fight. I've already read security professionals say he should have never been allowed to stand up. He should have been rolled down those stairs in a human ball. And so questions will be asked of those Secret Service agents as to why they let him stand up and gesticulate, because you just said it. There was still a clear line of sight. It wasn't known then if there was more than one shooter, blah, blah, blah. But it's done. This iconic photograph is going to be the photograph of the campaign, and the photograph that the Democrats are going to have to deal with. Now, here's the interesting part. I'll start with the Republican side. They started their convention today, and Trump is due to appear tomorrow or Wednesday for his coronation, and he's going to announce his vice presidential candidate. The question then is, will he come out and call for revenge, which he has done all along, which, his whole persona is grievance, doing paybacks on his opponents? Will he use this moment, he can't help himself, and call for revenge and make the situation much worse? Or will he try to do a Biden and offer himself as a national unity candidate, say bygones are bygones, this person acted alone, probably was mentally ill, who knows what was going on, and let's all go have a group hug? I reckon that's not going to happen. I reckon Trump is going to take this very personally. He is going to blame the Democrats for this, insinuating that maybe they had something to do with it, and then things are going to absolutely hit the fan. Now, there is another issue we have to consider, and I haven't seen anyone really talk about it. You and I have not sat down and had this conversation since Biden fumbled at the debate. That was indeed a disastrous performance. And I, as a result of that and subsequent gaffes, I believe that he should step down. And I'll tell you why, and then say why this moment is so important. Joe Biden needs to step down because he and his son, Hunter, are the sole focus of Trump's campaign. Sleepy Joe, obsolescent Joe, fragile Joe, feeble Joe, and his criminal son. If you remove them from the equation, then Trump has very little to campaign on. The border, well, migration is down, as it turns out, no matter how they want to spin it. Crime is worse in red states than it is in blue states, no matter how they want to spin it. The economy is on the up, no matter what they say about inflation. In the past quarter, inflation is down. In other words, they have nothing to run on other than the Bidens. So you take the Bidens out of the equation, and it really doesn't matter who you replace them with. The Democrats have a fair list of people led by Kamala Harris, but there's others who can come in. The single most important point is they're all 20 years younger than Biden. Everybody is in their 50s or even their late 40s.
So that's you're talking optics just on that, but it's not just about optics, is what you were saying here. That it's a perfect kind of storm, if you like, coming from Trump. Trump has so many things on the menu that he can actually target Biden, and you're saying like Hunter Biden and his convictions. So as soon as Biden or others say, "Well, Trump's a convicted felon," you say, "So is his son." You saw it in the debate. Trump has his entry into the retaliation of insinuating that even Biden, when he loses the election, could be up before the courts without saying why. But that kind of thing sticks. But I wonder, Paul, whether or not, that rat cunning we talked about with Trump, and we saw him play it in a way we didn't expect after the last debate, where Biden is soaking up all the news for all the wrong reasons. Trump goes quiet. And I wonder whether Trump is trying to work out, do I go after them really hard now with the conspiracy theory things that I'm the victim, they're trying to take me out? I personally think he will, but he also is the kind of person that pivots to the unusual, and it might be that he goes soft. I don't know, plays the martyr, I'm the victim. No, that won't work in the political sense of getting a vote. So he'll go after them in a narcissistic kind of, I am the victim here and they need to be removed.
Yeah. I mean, he doesn't have it in him to show compassion and empathy. Remember, he's a malignant narcissist. But it's more important in this sense. It's just a tactic, okay? You remove the Bidens from the equation. He's got nothing to focus on. He can't talk about his own achievements and everything because everything is a lie. What happens if the Bidens remove themselves, and I'm saying plural because Hunter will be mentioned, then you've got to turn to policy. And here's the important part. You know my feelings. It's not just about the person. It's about the team. If the Democrats keep Joe Biden's policy agenda intact, if they retain a lot of the team that has surrounded him and have implemented these very successful policies of recovery from the disaster that was the Trump administration, then they will govern very well. And they will be able to campaign on policy continuity, not personalities. They got to get off the personality wagon.
Right. Yeah, because it feeds into the national populist kind of platform that Trump absolutely seduces, doesn't it, if they remain on this. And at every stage that I've seen in the last month, it's the Biden campaign responding as opposed to leading the narrative, apart from the issues of frailty. And you mentioned on Twitter overnight that there is an issue in your mind that Trump, with the myth of Donald Trump looking like he's invincible, like he looks like something, out of some sort of classical history study in that photograph. And if you do a comparison of the optics, you've got a frail, aging man where the question may not necessarily be how his acuity is on election day, but it's certainly a major factor of what it is in a year's time, 2 years and 3 years and 4 years. You know, the Democrats are kind of saying, oh, well, that's why we've got Kamala Harris as a good vice president. But those optics are really, the comparative optics of candidate against candidate are really strong. I pick up what you're saying, Paul. You might want to speak to that point too.
Yeah, I mean, so again, over the short term, Trump gets a major boost. We have to remember that this is a guy who said he could shoot someone on Fifth Avenue and he would get away with it. Well, it turns out he can be shot at an open rally and he can prosper from that. Remember, too, this is a guy whose campaign has put out Photoshop photos of him on Rambo's body, him as Captain America, him as Batman. The mythology surrounding Trump's invincibility, his immortality is already there. And lo and behold, this happens. He manages to survive an assassination attempt. This is going, the United States is the land where everything is over the top. We are about to see the craziest campaign ads that will have him stopping meteors, circling the circumference of Jupiter. Who knows?
Well, I saw this morning a photograph that was being pushed with basically Trump on his knees, deep in prayer, with light of God behind him, giving him a halo effect, and the person commenting, that was pushing it around, saying, we want God to bring vengeance on those that tried to take this man out. So we're seeing it, aren't we? The images, the gloriousness of the imagery. Now that doesn't affect a lot of reasonably minded people, but that's not what they're engineered to connect to. They're not there for the reasonably minded person. They're there for those that are going to vote that are impressionable.
Right, and you've just said it. The evangelical Christians, and again, I'm on Twitter. I see the right wingers now. It's become a cesspit since Musk took over. The Christian right believes that God saved him. They're looking up at the clouds above him and say that's an angel up there. So that's gone crazy. I'm an atheist, so I'm thinking, no, they're going to make him into Superman. Again, he's going to do superhuman feats, but that's a done deal, okay? Between the religious interpretations and then the Marvel comic approach to campaign advertising, this guy is going to explode. And as I say, I think in the convention this week, it's going to be about revenge. It's going to be about blaming the deep state for this attempt on his life, but they couldn't do it because he's that invincible. Okay, so what do the Democrats have to do? And this is where I think this event has forced Biden's hand. Biden, as the Democrats always do, he's resisting calls to step down. His family apparently have circled the wagons around him to the point that they're preventing senior advisors from having one-on-one conversations with him. All his conversations now are being mediated by members of his family and very senior political loyalists. And so we're sort of stumbling towards the Democratic convention in mid-August. The issue is this assassination attempt has brought the contrast between Trump's supposed invincibility and Biden's feebleness into very stark relief. Very stark relief. And the Republicans are going to use this to their disadvantage. So I think beyond Trump's boost, the most significant implication of this, it is going to force Biden's hand. He will have to resign in light of this. Who would have thought it? But here's the thing. The Democrats have a window of opportunity here. This shouldn't be about doom and gloom. I just talked about the team and the policy agenda. What they need to show is that
that's
the
what
Democrats...
Barbara picked up your credentials as a PR person in the comments there, Paul.
Oh, I didn't see it, but thanks, Barbara. I appreciate it. But the deal is this. What the Democrats have to show now is that they can go to their convention, even in a crisis, because this is definitely now a crisis for them, but show that they have institutional means to have an orderly succession selection process, even in the crisis. Draw up a short list of candidates, have them give speeches to the convention. James Carville, the former Carter advisor, he actually recommended that they have 4 big town halls, Northeast, Midwest, South, and West, mediated by Bill Clinton and Barack Obama, 2 successful candidates, and where a short list of vetted candidates led by Kamala Harris would answer questions in these town halls as if it was an extended job interview process. I actually think that's worth considering. But if not, then the convention will be the job interview. And they've got candidates. I'm not a fan of Governor Newsom of California, but many people are.
There's Shapiro as well in Pennsylvania, isn't there? Ironically.
Yeah, what's her name? The governor of Michigan is considered a candidate. Gretchen Whitmer, I think. Well, regardless of my mangling her name, they have to show that they're not running around like chickens with their heads cut off, that there is an institutionalized process of candidate succession, even though it's a crisis moment for the Democrats. If they do that, then I think they overcome the advantages that Trump has, because he doesn't have a viable policy agenda, and they have as a weapon public knowledge that Project 2025 is going to be the policy agenda if Trump wins. And Project 2025, in a nutshell, is going to try to return the United States to the 1950s, when white men ruled over everybody else. But if you ask women, if you ask African Americans, if you ask gay Americans how things were in the 1950s, you know what? It wasn't Ozzie and Harriet. It wasn't good times for them. No, in fact, far from it. And so, but that's what Project 2025 wants to do. So if they get a new team in place, they can focus on what passes for a policy project on the Trump side, which is this horror show of Project 2025, and offer as a stark contrast a younger team, much younger than Trump, who aren't raving lunatics, who have a policy agenda that for the past 3.5 years has successfully arrested American decline, at least domestically. I mean, the foreign policy aspects of this are very complicated. I don't think anyone who's pro-Palestinian is going to get satisfaction out of this election. It's just not going to happen.
Either way.
Either way.
Like David Mooring raises the thing, what question here, and David is noting too that a lot of his comments and questions are not coming through the YouTube filter at this time. Hopefully YouTube relaxes such things once we're over the immediate shock of this acute period. But David asks here, what should Democrats do? And Paul, there's a few things that seem to be rocks in the road for the Democrats that seem that they can, to me, that they can navigate around or remove that rock. And one of the rocks is of a number of things. But one of the rocks is that a lot of the money that has come through from donors has been to the Biden-Harris campaign. And that may have been put within that kind of thing relating to the CPAC, but also the entity that is capturing that donation on that ticket potentially as well. So, there's been a bit of talk prior to this assassination attempt on Donald Trump about, Biden really, that if he stands down, yes, that makes it easier, but it's difficult for the Democrats to do something about him if he refuses, because all of this money has come in. It's tagged to the campaign, etc., etc. It seems to me that can be resolved, and I'll put it to you can it be? But before we do, there's also the other factor relating to, it's closely aligned to this, I suppose, that one of the solutions may be that Kamala Harris simply is the new nominee. if it works in that way. There's other things too where major donors have pulled. This happened, I was reading news of it immediately prior to Trump's rally starting, that $90 million had been pulled by donors to the campaign on the basis that they no longer had confidence that Joe Biden was able to do it to get a win, and obviously then they get banged for their buck. So there are all these signals that, yes, on one hand, there is money that's tagged to the campaign, but there's also donors who are pulling their commitments on the basis of the campaign remaining the status quo. Just wanted to bring that out into the open so that you can address that particular issue. Is there a way forward that quite simply can be resolved and they can get on with the business of having a proper campaign, like you've said, on the policies and taking away the emphasis on personalities?
Yeah, well, let me start with a broader conceptual point. The person in liberal democratic politics, the person does not come first. Again, I'm anti-personality. People serve the party serves the country, and the country serves the nation. That is the proper order of things. People are substitutable and exchangeable, and never a person's interests should come before those of the party. For that reason alone, Biden needs to go, because he's gone from being an asset to a liability. He is dragging the party down. He's dragging the ticket down. So there are people down ballot. Remember, the whole House of Representatives is up for election in November, one-third of the Senate. He's dragging them down.
Which is a totally different picture, isn't it, when you've got a Donald Trump administration in the White House and you potentially have the Senate and the House Republican. That is a different picture all again, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, this is what the Democrats are facing. But, that should be the first order of business. Biden is substitutable. He is not greater than his party. And he needs to, wake up and face the music. I mean, he needs to leave for the good of his party, and I would argue for the good of the country, given the scenario you just mentioned. Now, I read, as you did, that Democratic donors have frozen $90 million to his campaign. That's the way to do it. All right. If he's not going to give that money to the Democrat National Committee, saying it's for his campaign alone, then withdraw it. Freeze it. Money talks in American politics, very unfortunately, but much more powerfully than in any other country. So the only way to get an obstinate guy to relinquish his grip on the candidacy is withdraw the money flow. And I would imagine that they're doing this now. I don't think it's novel me saying that this assassination attempt, basically, it's over for Biden. The guy who got killed was actually Biden, not Trump. His political fortunes in this race, they're done. And so hopefully the Democratic donors and the big players will understand that whatever process we use, we got to show up in mid-August ready to turn the tide. And that way, Trump will live off of this as long as he can. But let's remember, there is 3.5 months before Election Day. That's a lot of time in politics. And if they can get their ducks in the row and offer their policy prescriptions and just watch Trump, go into a revenge rage of incoherency, then I think a lot of people on November 5th will go, yeah, all of this was extremely weird, but we don't want that scenario of Trump and majorities in both houses of Congress running the show. That'll be the end of abortion rights. Anyway, it will be, at least from my perspective, an absolute nightmare. And I think a lot of people,
that's where the platforms, like you identified earlier too, on policy, the Republican platform is vulnerable. And it's because of this, the over-conservativization, if that is a word, of the outcome of this election if it goes Republican in both the presidency and also in the House and Congress in general. But yeah, that is a big thing. And you could see earlier on before the debate and the issue of age crept into this and the optics of virility or frailty. We could see, these issues that the Democrats confidently kept bringing it back to Roe, didn't they? The politicisation of the Supreme Court. All of these things that they were saying, we want you to vote for us because we're the checks and balances as to what your experience as a woman or as a human in the United States in the 2021 going forward is going to be. Vote for us and we can get back to the business of living a society that you wish to be engaged in living within. So, that is a big thing. Let's get down to it. We've seen, and there was mention in there, and I think, it was an interesting one, but mentioning of the George Clooney, the people that are big poster people for the democratic effort. Obviously, within the apparatus, the political apparatus, we've got people like Barack Obama, and we've got Nancy Pelosi, and those ones that Biden may actually be susceptible to hearing their message, maybe. We've seen Barack Obama at the initial stage after the debate saying, "Oh no, everyone has a bad day," doing that party line. To a degree, Nancy Pelosi too. But over the weeks, we've seen that change. Barack Obama being more quiet on it when, relating to what Biden should do. And Nancy Pelosi having that interview where she says basically that he has a decision to make, which is kind of interesting, isn't it? Because Biden had already indicated that he'd already made that decision to stay. So she's kind of massaging that and saying, really, no. You've got to make that decision yourself, and you've got to, clearly as a communicator and an experienced one, she's obviously indicating that he should go. So we're seeing a bit of a change. Paul, do you think that, we've got the RNC, the Republican National Convention, right? We've got the Democratic National Convention coming up later. Do you think Biden would be forced to actually admit that he's got to go prior to, while all of this is going on relating to Trump? Or does he leave it until there's a convention? Or does he ride it out with the previous strategy where he thinks, if I ride it out long enough, it stops my opponents within my own party from having any way of addressing this issue?
Yeah, I think it's too far gone for that. The way it should play it out, well, first of all, in order to convince Biden and his closest advisors that he needs to step down, is you appeal to his sense of service to his party and to the country. And you lay out exactly what the two of us have just laid out. He's going to drag his party down if he stays, and he's going to drag the country down because if Trump gets a majority in both houses, it'll be disastrous. I mean, that's the bottom line. So guys like Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, hopefully they're appealing to his sense of service and saying, it's just you've got a really good run. Your legacy is going to be this policy agenda that we are going to keep. And you can be in Singapore. When I lived in Singapore, Lee Kuan Yew was called the minister mentor. He had retired from being prime minister, but then he was elevated to minister mentor. And his son became prime minister with his father mentoring him along in the role as prime minister. Well, Joe Biden can become the presidential mentor. He can hang around, offer advice, even have an office in the West Wing, as far as I'm concerned, and display continuity. He can't resign, okay? He's the president. So he can serve out his term till January 20th next year. And hopefully, if a Democrat wins, then he just hands it over in-house. And that keeps on going. Do you see how that looks? It looks like an orderly transition. That's what the Democrats need. And their policy achievements will carry them in the face of the lack of coherent policy that addresses all United States citizens, because Project 2025 does not, absolutely does not. It harks to a day that never was. You know, the 1950s, again, as Ozzie and Harriet Land. That never happened. That was a TV show. That wasn't reality. And so the Democrats have a lot to campaign on. They just have to convince Biden that he needs to step down for the interests of the Democrat Party and his country, and they've got to be able to get to the convention in an orderly fashion. What I would imagine is right now, party elders are drawing up a list of viable candidates. And again, led by Kamala Harris, because that's the natural succession scenario. And what should happen, in my mind, is that between now, they first wait for the Republican convention and see what happens, because it could be absolute circus show, and with Trump saying that, you know, his people need to go out and exact revenge on and then name any Democrat. We don't know what's going to happen with the Republicans. I don't think it's going to go well from a peace perspective, but you wait until that happens. Then Biden, either right after that or perhaps closer to the convention, he makes a statement that is akin to the LBJ letter, very famous letter, where Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1968, in March of 68, before the convention, later that year, later in late spring, early summer, he wrote a letter, I think to the Speaker of the House, and he said, if nominated, I will not accept. If elected, I will not serve. Biden needs to do the same thing. Say, if they nominate me, I will not accept the nomination. Instead, I'm going to free my 3,000 delegates to vote as they choose. And the party has drawn up a list of candidates. If he does that, the transition's on and they get themselves righted, and no amount of myth making is going to overcome the fact that's all Trump is, a myth in his own mind, now supported by the actions of a clearly unwell individual.
Yeah, we're speaking about myths. You know, there's a myth, I think, that in Biden's mind that is built up beyond his obvious abilities at this stage as well. And, you know, the difficulty is that we understood prior to the last debate that Biden was a stubborn man. He was a politician who had made a lot in the past of, I get knocked down, but I get back up again. And we talked about this in a previous episode. But what we've seen more is evidence of how stubborn the guy can be. If he chooses and says, no, I'm staying. No, I'm the best one here to be able to address this, and I've got things I'm going to be doing. Is that then, and this is something that we were going to talk about today before the assassination attempt, and no doubt the next episode we bed into this, one would hope. And it's about when the population is given the opportunity to vote tactically, and all of these other kind of things that you were going to bring into it. Now, I'm not trying to bring that part of the episode that we will dedicate it, because it's a very, very good one. But just in general sense, if Biden refuses to go, what then? Is it, and the party apparatus around the Democrats are so still corporate Democrat that it can't address what is a public interest, national interest, and global interest issue. Then is it left to the public? And how does the public respond to that? We know that there is a mood of anti-incumbency that swirls around the world, and in particular on issues of idealism. Just like when we were all young, the young are voting in different ways than what we expect. We saw in France, and this is something that David Mooring brought up earlier on in the episode here by way of a comment that got through, that in France, the opportunity was given to the voters to be able to vote tactically. And we will examine not just that in another episode, but also the consequences of that and what the challenges are, and also define it in a way that Paul's been working on and wrote about it. But what do the voters do when they are actually the opportunity to express a tactical vote beyond non-vote and perhaps vote or voting for the other side is the only options that they have?
Well, specifically, I think that what's going to happen if Biden stays in is that many otherwise Democratic voters will abstain. They simply will not vote for him. They won't vote for Trump, but therein lies the problem. Trump has, if we think of the MAGA crowd, they're about 30% of the electorate. This boost, he's bound to get another 5% minimum because the evangelicals are going to galvanize their base. All sorts of right wingers will now get energized by this attempt on his life. So he gets a bump in terms of voter turnout. The Democrats will lose voters, not because they're voting against Biden, but they simply will not vote for him. Another reason, change the top of the darn ticket, and then people have a reason to vote. Or the Democrats could try to turn this into a sincere vote. So it's an existential threat. The vote is about your future, okay? It's all or nothing. Because as I was going to write, and we'll talk about it, sincere votes are not that you vote honestly. It's a vote that is either all or nothing. It's the end vote, even if there's a process on the way to it. All other voting is tactical. And so the Democrats might want to make this into an all or nothing proposition. I don't think that's a good idea because it could work against them. Trump and his crowd can say the same thing, that you're going to allow a bunch of commies and whatnot to take over and ruin the American way of life. So I think it needs to go back to, we've got two options here: a raving lunatic who survived an assassination attempt, and a team with a policy agenda that is focused on trying to improve the welfare of all Americans, not just some of them. And if they can put those in juxtaposition, then instead of the stark contrast between, Captain America and Mr. Feeble, you'll have a stark contrast between a lunatic who survived and a team with a policy agenda who know where they're headed. And, again, I could go on about Trump and his campaign. It's about grievance. It's about revenge. What campaign is based on denigrating your own country? This is a guy who says we're going down the tubes where, and of course it's all the blame of colored people and what have you, but it's a crazy campaign if you just step back and go, guy spends most of his time whining about what a crappy place he lives in and only he can fix it. Well, right now, Biden can say nothing because the media, whether they're complicit or not, have decided to clickbait their way towards trying to get him out. Okay, they're totally focused on him. They could care less until the assassination attempt about anything Trump was saying. Now, they're going to deal with the assassination, but more importantly, if Biden removes himself from the equation, then they've got to confront what the Democrats have to offer. And 3.5 months is a long time in politics, but it doesn't give the Republicans enough time to get a lot of dirt on the Democratic candidates. Harris is a well-known entity. I've already seen them dishing dirt on her. Whoever will be the VP candidate, if she's the presidential candidate, they'll dig up stuff. That's part and parcel of the process. But I think the key here is if he doesn't leave, then they will lose. To me, there's no doubt about that anymore. Sorry as I am to have to say that. So, weird way, the choice has already been made, and it was cemented by this event yesterday. And now the question is, how do the Democrats resolve this crisis in a way that looks favorable on them and offer them a chance to not only rebound, but turn the conversation away from personality and towards politics, as hard as that is when you're dealing with someone like Trump.
There's one thing else that, just as we're closing, and I'll put to you and just see where you would like to go with it, and it is the question of the running mate for Trump. Now, considering the events of the weekend with the assassination attempt on Trump, who would that likely be? You know, I guess there are people that are around that are being looked at. I suppose a couple of the well-known ones would be Cruz, Senator Cruz, and Rubio. Where do you see that? Do you think that Trump can absorb all of his base without anyone eroding it, and that strategically they can broaden the Republican vote, if you like, from those like previous kind of factions, the Bush factions, you know, the ones that were more agreeable before the Tea Party issue started to creep into the party, and broaden it out by the way of a VP? Or do you think Trump would think, no, I'm not interested in broadening it. I want to make it bigger, mega? So, you know, are we likely to see this type of thing come through from his choice of running mate?
Well, I'm probably not the best person to ask this, but let me tell you this. Normally, when you look at vice presidential candidates, you think of first and foremost survivability, right? Can they step into the role if the president is incapacitated? That's an easy one, right? Just because someone who's healthy. And then you start thinking about voting demographics. You know, do you need to appeal to the Midwest, but also the South and this, that, and the other?
The male Hispanics.
Right, that's an increasingly big block. But, you know, you think of women, you think of African Americans, you think of Hispanics. Increasingly, at least the Democrats think of gay Americans, increasingly Indian Americans, Asian Americans. I mean, all that goes into the mix. But that's not what happens with Trump. Trump wants a brown noser. Trump wants someone who will kiss his rear end. He didn't like Mike Pence, even though Mike Pence was a supplicant of the worst sort. So Cruz might be good in that role. Cruz will grab his ankles if Trump says anything to him. Little Marco might be a little, he's doing an imitation of Cruz recently. The guy that seems to be rising very quickly in Trump's esteem is J.D. Vance, the author of Hillbilly Elegy, which was a decent book, but he's now gone full MAGA. You notice they're all white males. 2 of the 3 of them are from the South. You know, because if you think Rubio and Cruz represent the Hispanic communities, the Cuban American community, and the Mexican American communities of Florida and Texas, respectively, I got a bridge I can sell you. These guys are, anyway, you might as well be white men. And then J.D. Vance is a white guy from the western slopes of Appalachia. You'll see there's no diversity there. What there is they're complete supplicants to Trump. Now, that's why I say I may not be qualified, because I'm thinking to myself, what is in it for them? Do they truly think MAGA is going to endure and they can step into his shoes at some point and become presidents themselves? I don't think so. I think that even if, let's say that he is not able, he wants to change the Constitution so he can run for another term after the next one, and then another term after that. A guy believes he's going to live to 120. Do they truly believe that if he cannot run anymore and they run on his coattails that they're going to win? I would say no. It'd be as if Mike Pence ran now, saying what a great job he did as VP. Everybody knows what Mike Pence was. Everybody knows what Cruz and Rubio are. So I would say J.D. Vance will get the nod. Trump will not. I mean, there are a couple of females that he might go for. he may be convinced that he's got to put a woman on the ticket. That's going to be hard for him to swallow for a variety of reasons, given his personality. But there are some nasty MAGA women out there that will genuflect when he walks by, and he might think that they're worthy of it, and they'll convince some conservative women that the cause is just. But the selection of the VP, which is going to happen in the next 48 hours or so, is all about Trump. It's not about the qualities of the candidate. And so none of the normal rules apply when it comes to trying to seek a candidate that will appeal to many constituencies. In this case, there's only one constituency, and the name of that constituency is Donald J. Trump.
Thanks for that, Paul. It certainly made sense to me. And to those that have joined us in the live recording of this podcast, thank you very much for your efforts. Once again, just acknowledging that many of the comments that were lodged were being filtered out, and that's beyond our control at this time. One would hope that the algorithms, whether they be AI driven or whatever, can be adjusted back at some stage once this acute period of sensitivity, obviously around discourse on these important issues, has relaxed somewhat more. If not, we'll find another way of getting those comments through. Once again, to those that are also listening to this on demand, thank you very much again for your support. For those that have joined us via Twitter, please do subscribe. Please do at this stage put your name down for future alerts. The subscription thing should do that, and give us a like, because that helps the algorithm of the platforms to go up, so that we can enjoy larger audiences and more engagement on your side of things as we deliver the podcast. So with all that said and done, thank you again to Paul for all of this analysis and assessments of what is obviously a moving thing. And we look forward to coming back with you in a couple of weeks with another podcast where we will dig down deep into an issue. And our hope is that we will look at the options that people face when they're expressing their votes. And Paul gave a bit of a guide on what to expect on that. And that may be very, very relevant in two ways. One, making sense of what we've seen in the world in the large elections around the world at this stage, including Britain, including France, and helping us to understand what's in play there as we lean forward into being able to predict or assess the likely outcomes in the near future on major big issues, which is obviously where the value and power of analysis lies, in trying to give a forward projection. Thank you again. Ka kite anō, stay safe out there, and look forward to your company again in the near future. Remember to subscribe. Thank you very much. Take care. Bye-bye.